Hi dear audience, hope you would be fine. Today we would be discussing Aristotle's concept of tragedy. In our previous video, we have discussed Aristotle's contribution to the philosophy, Western philosophy, and his contribution to the concept of imitation, how he has represented the concept of imitation in a very positive sense against the preoccupations of Plato. So in this we would be discussing Aristotle's concept of tragedy, his definition of the tragedy, and then the elements of tragedy which he has introduced, and then what's his conception about the plot and the structure of the plot. So whenever we talk, usually we start our criticism, then even we discuss Plato in that backdrop of Aristotle, means our significant formal criticism starts from Aristotle, though they were important, but they were to some extent misleading. First organized and more dominant and good to reason criticism starts from with the Aristotle's book Poetics. So Aristotle holds a very significant position as a critic and towards the development of elements of literature, means element means from genre means tragedy. No doubt poetry was there, the concept of poetry was there, poets were there, but how he has analyzed viewed the poetry with reference to the criticism, that's the totally our contribution of Aristotle. So Aristotle's concept of tragedy, concept of poetry, concept of plot, all these are very significant contributions. No one paralleled even Plato, though he was his master, he was his teacher, but he was not so mature as Aristotle was. To some or less whatsoever we have to say, we have to admit it, and this is really a fact. Aristotle's analysis of the tragedy remains influential until the 18th century. Here it is very important. There are two types of tragedy. One is the classical tragedy and other is the modern tragedy. But even a tragedy, in modern tragedy, some sort of elements keep on changing. For example, if in classical tragedy we usually used to have a superhero, like means man above the normal man, but now in modern tragedy even a common man can be the hero of the tragedy. Therefore, but however, the elements of tragedy, the the structure of the plot remains, however, to some extent in the modern tragedy as well. Means even the modern tragedy does not completely deny the elements and the structure of the tragedy which Aristotle has proposed. So Aristotle concept with less or more still is valid even in the modern times as well. It is here that the connection between the imitation, action, character, morality, and the plot emerge most clearly, as in Aristotle's famous definition. This is this red one is the famous definition of Aristotle of the tragedy, in which all these has been talked about. He has talked about imitation, action, character, morality, and the plot. So he takes tragedy. He says that tragedy is then an imitation of an action that is serious. Means tragedy would be only then a tragedy if it would be imitation of an action. Otherwise, for example, if it is the imitation of is not the imitation of a serious action, it might not be the tragedy. So if tragedy is an imitation of an action which is serious, but if it is not complete, then it would not be a tragedy. Similarly, if tragedy is the imitation of an action that is serious, and complete, but it does not have a certain magnitude, mean it is not of some particular length, then it would not be a tragedy. Means all these elements are interlinked with one another. They are, are like, weight, scaling weight, might be the stones of weight of the tragedy. By these stones we measure the weight of the tragedy. By means of language enriched with all kinds of ornament, means the language of tragedy is more ornamented, each used separately in the different parts of the play. It represents men in action and does not use narrative, means tragedy is more a dramatic in nature rather than narrative. Narrative is a long narrative, means how the things happen. It is not narrative, but it is dramatic, and through that dramatic its representation, it arouses the pity and fear. It affects relief to these and the similar emotions, means it creates, leads to the catharsis. It arouses the feelings of pity and fear as well. And catharsis is more like a purgative, is more a medicinal sort of remedy to the human's emotions. When man starts weeping, so he feels cathartic. By pity and fears, mean he himself comes to a very biomedical, in the biomedical sense, he expresses his own feelings and he feels relaxed. Whatever has been the psychopathological treatment of suppressed feelings later on has been proposed psychoanalysis, they have been the similar situation of pity and fear and the catharsis. So the Greek word used for action means the paraxis, which here refers not to a particular isolated action, means a man is walking in a room, but to an entire course of action, means the whole novel or drama. They bring to a situation, they bring to an action through the events, and events that include not only what the protagonist does but also what happens to him. Means action does not means what the protagonist, means the hero of the story, is doing, means but what is happening, what the other people are doing, and what's the impact of the other people's action on the protagonist. So in qualifying this action, Aristotle again uses the word spontaneous, which means serious and weighty. This is essentially a moral seriousness, means tragedy. And now I again read this, that tragedy is then the imitation of an action that is serious, complete, and have a certain magnitude, and by means of language enriched. It should be enriched one, it should be weighty one, it should be the serious one, and it should be ornamented with all kinds of language. Whatever there are the ornament and devices of the language, they should be used. That should not be the language of a common man, that should not be the language of a poor man speaking in the street. But if in the tragedy, even if it would be the language of a common man, for example, common characters speaks in Shakespeare's characters as well, dramas as well, but even the common men speak puns. That's very interesting in Shakespeare. They have dual meaning. Even means a illiterate man is using puns. Pun cannot be choked or cut by a very man of ordinary senses. So that is too witty. So even means from where Shakespeare assigned the role of a common man, still they are cutting puns, making other ornament and literary devices as well in their speech. That's very interesting. So tragedy should be, and it represents men in action and does not use narrative. So it should present men in action, and it should not be narrative, but it should be dramatic, and it should arouse pity and fear and similar other emotions. It seems then that the subject matter of the tragedy is a course of action which is morally serious, present a complicated unity means, and that action means tragedy is like an action. But that action should be spoken out, and that should be serious, and that should be presented in a complete unity and occupies a certain magnitude, not only in the terms of importance but also, as we will see, in the terms of certain prescribed constraints of the time, place and complexity. Means tragedy cannot happen in a single setting. Tragedy cannot happen at a single in a single room. Tragedy cannot be though it would be tragic, but it would not arouse that sense of tragic and pity and fear to a greater extent. So it should be encompassed on some particular time. It should be encompassed on some particular places, different places as well, and the complexity it should bear. Moreover, since the tragedy is essentially dramatic rather than narrative, it represents men in action, and a properly constructed tragedy will provide a relief or catharsis for various emotions, primarily pity and fear. Primary out of these emotions, primarily are the pity and fear. Rest may be the other as well. I mean, it can create laughter as well, just to some extent, as there are in the comic relief, comic tragedy. There are comic and there are some comic scenes might be in the tragedy. So out of that sort of tragedy, it might provide a little bit comic relief as well. Hence, the effect of the tragedy on the audience is the part of the very definition. So definitely, if tragedy does not have an effect on the audience, it might not be a tragedy. The notion of action is central to Aristotle's view of tragedy, because it understands the other components and the features, which are these. We would be listed. I have listed these one, which are number one, plot, character, diction, thought, spectator means those who see you, and the song. These are the elements of tragedy, and these elements include the means of imitation, mean diction and the song. These two are means of imitation, diction and the song. They are included in means of imitation, and manner of imitation means spectacles, how they view the world, and the object of imitations to what they might be doing in the plot, actions as arranged in a plot, the character and the thought of the actors. So Aristotle also prescribes some other certain requirements, such as completeness of action, that action should be complete. It should have artistic unity. Artistics mean emblematic language, and it should have emotional impact on the audience. Emotional impact means it should be able to arouse pity and fear. The elements of tragedy which imitates human action is not primarily the depiction of the characters. Means it's not caricaturing the character. Means there was a hero. He was 5 feet long, 6 feet long. He was having big mustache. He was very healthy. He was very brave. It's not like that. You create a character through a man. For example, for bravery, we should not have to say that this man is a very brave. We have to represent that man's bravery through his action. For his such representation, we would have to create some situations in which we have to show his behavior to some particular incident to our audience. So, for example, if he snags and he runs away, and the audience would be expecting that this man might be a coward one. So, but if the hero see the snakes and he fight against that snake, or try to kill that, or even attempt to kill that, and he is bitten by that snake and is died, but his effort would be remembered by the listener and the viewer and the reader. You got my point, I think. So we create the concept of bravery, boldness through the character while engaging himself into different situations. So that's more of the action. The element of tragedy which imitates human action is not primarily the depiction of the character but the plot, which Aristotle calls the first principle and the soul of the tragedy. Aristotle accords priority to action in the poetic representation. Tragedy is not a representation of men or of character, rather it represents a sphere of action of life. I have talked on this up till now. Because tragedy is essentially dramatic, its basis cannot be the depiction of character. As Aristotle points out, one cannot have a tragedy without action. So, but a tragedy without character study is quite feasible. Means we can have a tragedy without character, but without action we cannot have a tragedy. So a tragedy must be based on certain structure of events or the incidents to which the specific actions of given characters contribute. This overall dramatic structure, the plot, is which tragedy aims. Means there is, he has introduced that there should be the different sort of elements of plot. Initiation means he is of the view that there should be a proper beginning, middle and the end. But what's important, that is that plot, why is there the need of plot? Basically plot contributes the development of the characters, and more it brings something to end, and end has no further initiation, and is end in itself. Means any end does not open into a new action or tale. Therefore plot is more like drags both character and the reader to a particular end. End means likely to a conclusion. From the perspective of emotions and pity and fear, so through beginning to the end, plot brings both readers and the character to an end. For example, at the beginning of the plot there would be the introduction of that hero. He would be moving across different actions, he would be, and in the end of his plot he would meet his own end. If it is serious, definitely. If it is tragedy, then he would be dying, means he would be meeting his end. And the reader at the same time would be meeting his end by arousing the pity and fear in his heart, or catharsis, by the process of catharsis. For Aristotle, the most important feature of the plot is the unity, and he says that it should be the united one. The component incidents must be so arranged that if one of them be transposed or removed, the unity of the whole is dislocated and destroyed. Means this is, he is of the view that plot should be organic, it should hold an organic unity. Aristotle sees that the entire complex as one unified action. How is such organic unity achieved? By this, Aristotle offers the following definition. Means a whole is what has a beginning and a middle and an end. So if any of this is distorted or is missing, then it might not be more unified, more organic. A beginning for Aristotle is that which is not necessarily caused by anything else, but itself causes something else. Beginning means beginning initiates something else. And a middle both follows from something else and results in something else. Means it is between the beginning and the conclusion and the result of something. It results into something. An end is what necessarily follows from something else. Means it is might be coming from the middle, but does not produce a further result. Mean end is end in itself. Hence, the unity of plot is based on the notion of the causality, means cause and happening, cause and effect. Causality means cause and effect, and a sequence of effects as well, means beginning is the initiation, and middle is coming from the beginning, and then end is coming from the middle. So in this way it is more a causality. Aristotle's formula concerning beginning, middle, and end have been profoundly influential, extending far beyond the confines of tragedy or the drama, and deeply infusing the modes of thinking and writing even into our own times. Aristotle explains the unity of plot in the terms of both the plot's formal structure and the emotions produced in an audience. While he divides the formal structure of the plot into prologue, epilogue, exode, parode, and stasimons, they are basically different stages of the plot. It is clear that from him the real structure of the plot consists in a movement of the action. Means action does not happen like explosion. It keeps on, it takes time, it uses different elements, from middle to, for example, beginning. There is the beginning, then there is the rise of an action. For that rise of an action, a tragedy writer has to involve different sort of episode, different sort of prologues. So prologues, there might be many prologues in a story as well, means in every section there might be a prologue. So he divides plot into continuous action and the complex plots, as is exemplified in Oedipus Rex. And most of all us of people have read Oedipus Rex in their courses as well. Therefore we talk this example of Oedipus Rex, whose action is marked by a movement through reversal. Means he was by the end of his happening, and now the action takes place in the reverse situations, means recognizing the things, recognitions. He is basically exploring the events which have had happened in the past and the sufferings. Much later in his text, he divides the action into two parts, means the complications, which includes all of the events until the change is in fortune, and the denouement. So classical literary criticism and the rhetoric are the unraveling which proceeds from the change in the fortune until the end of the play. In this play, the change is fortune, and is indeed in classical tragedies, but basically we see that everything, even tragedy, is going to happen because of the fate. So at the center of the play, the action is divided, both leads to it and follow from it, and it is in relation to that that reversal, recognition, and the suffering takes their significance. Aristotle prefers complex plots because it is through the process of reversal, recognition, and suffering, and that the emotions of the pity and fear are evoked, which themselves contribute to the plot's unity. Therefore Aristotle prefers this one. So plot's unity, we have talked about that it should have proper beginning, middle, and end. These are the elements of plot's unity. Integrates into only causality, probability, and the change of fortune. That definitely change of the fortune would be the end of the plot, but also the emotions of fear and pity which are generated in an audience. Aristotle explains that pity is aroused by undeserved misfortunes. For this you have to keep in mind that for the tragedy, hero should be more than the normal man. It should not be likely to God and angels, but it should be lesser than the superpowers, but it should be superhuman as well. Then it would be more tragic. People would be perceiving him as a tragedy. Tragedy has more the sense of misfortune. So misfortune happens with the good people. You do not deserve the misfortune. When a person is not deserving the misfortune and it happens to him, it makes him tragic, and this one creates the impact on the reader's mind. So for example, if you are a criminal and you are punished, so it's not going to arouse a sense of pity and fear among you, and it would not be basically a tragedy. It would be a story of punishment, a criminal trial. So criminal trial cannot be tragedy. Tragedy is what means you were not deserving as much punishment as you are, as you receive. And a tragic hero is one who is not a common man, but holds some more superpowers, some more extraordinary powers than a common man. And the person who behaves lesser than a common man becomes a humoric character or the comic character. Aristotle explains that pity is aroused by the undeserved misfortune. This word is very important. Undeserved misfortune. Fear is aroused when we realize that the man who suffers such misfortune is like ourselves. Means if that man is suffering, we may also suffer. So this is what fear is. Hence, these emotions cannot be inspired by a wicked man prospering, nor can they issue for seeing the misfortune suffered by either an entirely worthy man or a thoroughly a bad man. Rather, the character in question must occupy a mean between these two extremes. He should not be a very common man, and he should not be very the other one. And yet, is though no badness or leniency of his own that he falls into the misfortune, but rather through some flaw in him. This is called the tragic flaw. Means a good man happens to the tragedy through their tragic flaw. Means hero cannot be without a tragic flaw. So it means a hero should not be so great that he is not having any tragic flaw. If he would not be having a tragic flaw, then how the tragedy would happen to him? So it's more like an Aeschylus heel, means something remain flawed even in the good men, and from those they are caught and they meet to their misfortune. If you have any question regarding this, you can ask me in the comment section. I would be available to answer these questions. With this, I hope it would be making sense to you. Goodbye. Thank you.